Welcome to the Ordinary Marathoner podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Ordinary Marathoner podcast. My name is Scott. I'll be your host today. I got a solo podcast for you today. That's right, it's just me. I got something in mind, I guess a story I want to tell, but we'll see how that goes. Now, I know it is Monday. It's probably going to be released Monday night. So, yes, I missed my Sunday deadline, but you know what? I've been away, and it's a vacation week. It's Memorial Day. Happy Memorial Day to everybody out there. Hope you guys had a good weekend and celebrated the holiday the right way. Man, so yeah, it's just going to be me here on the podcast. I don't have a guest for you. But we'll get to that in just a minute. As always, you can find this in the back episodes of the podcast at our website. It's called ordinarymarathoner.com. Check it out if you get a chance. You can also find the podcast on the, the aggregators, places like Stitcher, TuneIn, and iTunes. If you got that iPhone, download that podcast app. Find Ordinary Marathoner Podcast. Subscribe to it if you like the show. You'll never miss a new episode that way. We also got our YouTube channel up and running now. I had, you know what, guys, I gotta admit, I just have no chops when it comes to editing stuff. So I haven't really put any, I know I owe you a video, but I haven't put any of that stuff out yet. We do have all our podcasts, at least the audio, up on YouTube. So it's just another vehicle for you to listen to them if you choose. So we got that up and going. You can find us over at Twitter at Ord Marathoner. That's O-R-D Marathoner. And if you follow us there, we'll follow you back and get the conversation going on over there. And you can also find our discussion group at Facebook. It's called Ordinary Marathoners. It's a closed group. You got to add yourself to it. As soon as you add yourself, we will approve you right away. And you can join the conversation over there or just be a lurker and read what other people have to say. I got to tell you, it's a really great group of people over there. Very positive, supportive. I've been sort of absent, I guess, from the social media the last week or two. It's just sort of, I don't know, you go through those ruts, right? Where it's like, it's like, I like to be genuine when it comes to social media. And sometimes I feel like I'm posting for the sake of posting. And obviously it helps the business if I do. It helps the listenership if I get involved. But sometimes it just feels forced and I feel like I just got to, back up a little bit and take a break from it, which I did. And I do want to thank everyone out there who has been sort of maintaining the page for me, posting on their own. It's been great. You guys are doing awesome. And I want to thank you guys for that. So moving on, I'm putting this podcast together. And a few weeks back, I was talking to a friend, an old college buddy of mine. He's a former podcast guest, a fellow marathoner, Jeremy Farrington, sort of like, I think he was one of probably the first, 5-10 podcast guests I had on. Great guy. So he came up with what I thought was a really great idea. His initial idea was to do a blog post, but I've been kind of not doing those lately. I've been doing these podcasts. So basically, the idea was to explain exactly what I mean by the title of the show, which is obviously Ordinary Marathoner. So what is an ordinary marathoner? Now, I thought this was an excellent idea, and I actually, I tried to record the podcast a couple times the last few months, but really never got to the point where I was happy with it. Never really quite got the narrative that I wanted. Something was just always a little off. And so when I went to release it, I just sort of thought twice about it, never really did it. I mean, it's the title of the show, right? Ordinary Marathoner. This is like our namesake. So, this kind of has to be good. It has to be comprehensive. Can't leave anything out. So I wanted to make sure I got this right. So I want to just kind of, that's going to be the intro of the show, probably like the first 15 minutes or so, I'm guessing. We're going to just talk about what exactly is an ordinary marathoner. And then towards the back end, I'm going to do a segment on my own personal running history and how we got here. I don't know how long this is going to be. It could be a long podcast. I really don't know. But we're going to see how it goes. We're going to roll with it. And, special Memorial Day podcast. So that's what we're going to go with. So first, I figure let's talk about the origins of the name Ordinary Marathoner. I think it's sort of important to context here. I mean, a few years ago, here I was. I had written some blog posts for some other blogs. I have done blogs in the past. I've created them and maintained them. And I was never, what happens is over time, if you want to have a successful blog, you have to be hitting it every single, almost every day. at least weekly, if not, if not every single day. You got to do it on a very regular basis. And I always had trouble finding time to do that. I mean, I'm training for marathons constantly. I'm a single dad, although I'm not single anymore, but at the time I was a single dad. I have a full-time job, so it's really hard to find time to write. And then when I do write, I don't want to force things. And I always get very nitpicky with my writing. I always, I don't know, I read it twice, I read it 3 times, and there's nothing that I despise more than when I post a blog and I find sort of common grammatical or spelling mistakes in it. It drives me insane. So I knew I just was not going to have time to maintain a blog. So I did do some guest blogging for other sites. And I just knew I would never, write as much as I wanted for my own. But then after a while, I built up some material and I thought, hey, maybe I just want a spot on the internet to put it, just somewhere to put my writing. If people found it, then fine. If they didn't, that's fine too. At least I had a spot for it. So when it came to the name of the blog I wanted to choose, I was sort of looking for something that described me, something general. I wasn't planning on writing any in-depth analysis on training advice or anything crazy, dieting advice, anything like that. I didn't want people to come here looking for technical know-how or expertise. I just wanted to write about my experiences as someone who sort of enjoyed running and really enjoyed sort of that feeling of accomplishment that you get when you finish when you achieve your goals, and especially when I finished my first marathon. And when I thought about it from that point of view, I just thought about the name Ordinary Marathoner. I mean, I felt like that's what I sort of typified me, and I could go with it. I checked for the URL, no one else seemed to have it, so bam, there you go. That was the origins of the name. Now, of course, there's some sarcasm in there. I mean, generally speaking, completing a marathon is anything but ordinary. So I don't know. I mean, the sport itself, it just seems to just be continually growing. I don't know. The stat I hear all the time is that less than 1% of everyone in the world will actually complete a marathon. And, I think about it, and there's 5-6 billion of us out there, which means that if I do the math right, that's like 50 to 60 million people doing marathons. Maybe that's right. I don't know. I mean, I think, there's a lot of small marathons out there, and then the big ones, you think about New York is 50,000 people. So I don't know. Can you get to 50, 60 million? Maybe, but it's certainly not more than that, much more than that. So 1% of the population, it's sort of, it sounds very exclusive, especially on a global scale. You think about it that way. It just sounds like a very small club. And yet, when I think of the sport itself, the sport of running, there's nothing I can think of that is more inclusive than the sport of running. Forget the whole marathon part of it and, just think of the sport. In fact, don't even think of the sport. Just remove the word sport and just think of the act of running. Maybe 1% of the people can finish a marathon, but 100% of the population can run. Now, maybe some of you guys are out there saying, oh, that's not right. What about people who are handicapped in a wheelchair, people who have no legs, or people who are incredibly out of shape, or something like that? I don't know. Maybe you're trying to dispute that fact. But really, if you ever watched a marathon, you'll note that the very first group of people that usually go off the starting line is the wheelchair division. And let me tell you guys, these people are every much of an athlete as the ones starting after them. I mean, I have seen a one-legged guy on crutches running in the New York City Marathon. One of our podcast guests, Frank Fumick, he was the guide for a blind man who finished the Boston Marathon. I mean, there are very few legitimate excuses not to be able to run. And when I say run, I mean, sort of that general, and a run, you could say walk. You could say if you're in a wheelchair, you could say, using the wheelchair. Maybe like if you're injured. That's probably the one legitimate excuse I can think of. If you're injured and you can't move, or you're going to get more injured, then yes, then perhaps then you can't run. But other than that, really, the sport is incredibly inclusive. Maybe you're out of shape to run. Maybe you don't, maybe you think you're past your prime and you can't get into it. But I mean, the people we've had on this show and the people who are out there that you just got to pick up, the internet and search. There are countless stories out there about people who just sitting on the couch pretty much can't move. And, I remember, when I was 280 and, I was breathing heavy just to put my socks on, and hard to tie my shoes, and losing my breath going down the stairs. There are countless stories of people who overcome these obstacles, and it just starts by taking those first few steps where walking, running, eating healthier, all that kind of stuff. Countless people have done that and taken those steps to run those first, run the first few steps, or run the first mile, run the first 5K, participate in a 10K, a half, I don't know, but you slowly build up, and it's each step on the way, it comes with its own sense of gratification and a sense of accomplishment. And it's a great thing to see, a great thing. It's a great, I don't know, it's sort of, the thing this sport has to offer is it's empowerment, right? It's self-empowerment. You can watch yourself get better and better as you keep doing it. It's a great thing. And in that way, that's the other thing about this sport, is though it's incredibly inclusive and that everyone can do it, it's also incredibly individualistic, because the most important measure of success are the accomplishments that you set for yourself. Do you want to run that first mile? Do you want to run a marathon? Do you want to just get faster, run further? It's all up to you. And if you're going to put the work in, you're going to see the results. And it's like I said, it's empowerment. You guys have probably heard about goal setting and stuff like that. It's probably important to touch on. I always look this up. It's that SMART goals, right? When you set goals for yourself, they need to be SMART. It's that SMART goals thing. It's like the basic definition of what goals need to be. And, goals should be, this is what I looked this up, so I don't think I know this off the top of my head. Goals should be specific. They should be measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. And sometimes you can apply these goals to your real life in terms of your career or your finances, your relationships, or that kind of thing. But applying them to running seems so simple, and achieving these goals can be so gratifying. It's just so empowering. And I think that's what I've learned about this sport, is that, it's just that combination. And if I was writing a book about the sport of running, and I might, that's like the next thing, is I've actually started and stopped. I remember what I said about being nitpicky about my writing. Yeah, that's what happens. I start writing a book, and then I look back 10,000 words and I scrap them all because I don't like them. But if I was going to start writing a book about running, I think I would probably separate the sport into two I's, and the two I's are inclusiveness and individualism. And that's what makes this sport so great. And those two words, you hear them and it sounds so opposite, right? They inclusive and yet individual. It sounds completely opposite, yet they're both so necessary when you describe the sport of running. And I can think of no activity that really epitomizes such a broad scope in terms of who may participate. And I can think of no activity that is so simple and to create individualistic and achievable goals for yourself, to empower yourself. And it's almost like a movement. When you combine these two, the two I's, when you combine them within sort of this community framework that we're starting to develop here, and on our, with the podcast and with the discussion group. And really what you do is you start to build this constructive environment where, people know what it means to achieve their own personal goals when it comes to running. And then not only that, but once they start achieving things, they want to help others achieve them too. And yet, we're not pushy. We're not, we're not forcing you to run, or we're not doing anything like that. We're not, saying you have to do this. It's all voluntary. But there's a lot of ways to motivate yourself, to seek inspiration and find inspiration through others, if you so choose, if that's what you feel like you might need, a little inspiration. It's all out there. And that's what we've been doing here at the podcast. And, on that note, I think that sort of defines it. And I think when you think of ordinary marathoner, you don't just think of just me, like as an ordinary person, no technical know-how or anything like that. You think of all of us, from the person sitting on the couch to someone like Shalane Flanagan or Meb or any of those big, Dean Karnazes, who's on the podcast, wrote all those books about ultramarathoning. It's an incredible array that we cover here in this sport and on the podcast and then with this community. And it's wonderful. And that's sort of my definition of what an ordinary marathoner is. It's everyone and anyone who seeks out this sport, who looks for guidance or wants to provide guidance or provide inspiration and just sort of support one another and help each other move forward and set and achieve realistic goals for ourselves, through hard work and determination. And that's it. That's it. I think that encompasses pretty much everything I wanted to say. We're going to hit the break right now. Hey, 15 minutes. That's pretty good. We're going to get back after the break, and I'm going to start to tell you my story and how I got involved in running. We'll be right back. I may not have a lot of hair, but I tell you, I know style when I see it. And I know you guys and gals with the flowing locks, you need something functional to keep that hair out of your face when you go on your daily run. And I have just the thing for you. It's called Greasy Girl Headbands. And I know what it sounds like, but it's not spelled that way. It's GREECIE, girlheadbands.com. They make headbands that are specially designed for the runner to keep that hair out of your face, out of your eyes when you're out there on your daily run. So check them out. GreasyGirlHeadbands.com, GREECIE, and find a design that's perfect for you. All right, guys, we are back now from break. Now, I'll tell you, I did have a little bit of an outline. I'm glad that first segment only took 15 minutes because I was kind of afraid I was going to talk a lot for a really long time. But I did have an outline for that part. I kind of knew what I wanted to say. And I'm just saying, going to this next part, I'm off the grid. I have no idea where this is going. My plan right now is to tell you about two sort of segments. We're going to take a break in between. So we're going to talk about two segments of my own personal experience with running. Now, like I said, I've started writing books multiple occasions. And one of my problems is I can never figure out what kind of book I want to write. Do I want to write something about my own experiences? Do I want to write sort of a self-help or a guidebook that, how I ran my first marathon or how you can be an ordinary marathoner? All those things were possibilities. So, all that stuff is kicking in my head. I think that eventually I will come up with some kind of combination of all that stuff and I will write something. Hopefully it'll be entertaining. But, a lot of this stuff that I've thought over and I've written or not written, but, we're going to try to give you the synopsized summary version, I guess, of all this stuff. Now, when I think about running and the sport of running and my experiences with it, I kind of break it up into two parts, which is going to be good for the show. But, the first part is really my early life from, when I first could walk, right? I was born back in Brooklyn. No, we're not going to go that far back, but, sort of like childhood and kind of my steps through, every time I set sort of a new distance for myself, because those things always stick with you and you remember those things. And then the second portion of this show will be sort of like when I hit 40 years old, 2014. And that was when I really got involved and really started pushing my running and ran my first marathon and really got involved in endurance sports. So I'm going to sort of talk about those two parts, right? So we're going to talk about the beginning and then we're going to talk about how I sort of just jumped into this endurance sport. And you guys, obviously, if you've listened to the podcast, you maybe have put together some bits and pieces here. Maybe you know the story already, but maybe you don't. And so I'm going to try to do a little summary version of it all. So, when I think of endurance sports and I think of my first initial exposure to it, and it must have been seriously like grade school. I think it was Mr. Geller at Albany Avenue. And there was this, we must have been doing one of those presidential physical fitness tests. You remember those? They probably still have those. And I remember we had to do 2 big laps and we ran outside the gym along a path and then we ran through a parking lot. The parking lot was empty. It wasn't like it was dangerous. Although back then, who knows? They could have had live traffic and they just still would have ran us out there. But, we had to do these 2 big laps. And, I remember not being intimidated by it. I just figured, all right, I got to run it. And I started running. And I don't know how long it was. I have no idea. There's no way it would have been a mile. I mean, it must have been 4th, 5th grade. There's no way that would have made us run a whole mile there. But maybe a half mile, I'm guessing. I don't know. And I remember, hitting a certain point where I actually got physically tired. And it had never really happened before. I'd never, normally when you run, like as a kid, you just run until you're exhausted and then you start slowing down but you never really, I don't know, there's one speed you run fast. You run as fast as you can, right? There's no middle speed when you're a kid. Until that day, at least for me, until that day, I had never had to slow down or maybe it just was the first time I actually noticed it. we hadn't run a lot of sprints or done any conditioning, and I played a lot of sports as a kid. I was a big baseball, football player. But we never really, we did some sprints, I guess, in football practice, but it was never to the point where I found, where I was exhausted. So this half mile, I'm guessing, whatever run, was the first time I ever noticed, running far makes you tired. So I remember that. And so, I think I did run that whole way that day, but I do remember being really, it took a lot out of me. It took a lot of pushing and sort of reaching down deep for even a fourth grader to finish that. And that was sort of the first day I recognized about endurance sports, that there's more to this than that. So, from there, I did start recognizing getting a little bit more tired here and there, but it wasn't until 8th grade when we were in gym class and they said, all right, we're going to time you all doing a mile. Now, there was no training involved for running a mile. There was no advice being given. There was no practice. It was, hey, all right, guess what we're going to do, guys? No, we're not playing volleyball, not playing baseball, we're not playing football. We're going to go run a mile. Wonderful. So we all hit the track, and then because of that prior experience, I knew in my head, all right, you know what? The trick is, don't go fast the whole way, right? I knew in my head, I was going to have to pace myself. So I didn't know what pacing was all about, but I knew I wasn't going to be able to run as fast as I could around that track. And I got out there, and I remember there was maybe, 40 of us, and the whistle blew, we all started running. Now, I would say more than half of the kids, just took off, ran full speed as fast as they could. Now, some of those kids, maybe a handful, they must have been gifted or somehow, I don't know. They were able to maintain a good speed through 4 laps and were able to finish the mile. And I don't remember the time, but pretty quickly. I paced myself from the get-go. I didn't know how fast to go. I just knew don't sprint. I got about halfway done, and all of a sudden, all the kids that had gone out too fast, I was passing them. And they were dying. And most of them ran the whole way. I will remember this. There was one kid that didn't run. He ran maybe the first lap, and then he stopped, and he walked. And that was fine. We all had to wait for him. I actually remember his name too, but I'm not going to embarrass him. But, it was a very strange thing but very memorable. Obviously, I'm recanting it. I'm remembering it, because it was an achievement. It was the first time I ever ran a mile, 8th grade. And then we got to high school, and I moved when I was in 8th grade to a different school after that. And we got to high school, and all of a sudden I did recognize I was out of shape. All of a sudden I'm out of shape, and doing sprints in football practice, and I feel like I'm going to throw up. It was bad. It was like a new world for me. And I don't know what that is. I don't know if it's, I had taken sort of a break from sports when I moved. And we were never really conditioned. Maybe it's just your body maturing, getting bigger, putting on weight, that kind of thing. And all of a sudden I'm lugging this weight around, and I never really felt like before. I never felt like it was a big deal before. Now you also have to remember, this is back in the day where we didn't have the internet, so there was no training programs available to us. There was no, extending your, how to run a mile or how to run for distance or any of that stuff. You just, if you played football, you just ran sprints, you did whatever the coach told you. I think we did have some more militaristic coaches back then. And I certainly had one one of the most militaristic was our baseball coach. And so I was in 9th grade. Actually, no, 10th grade. Sorry. So this is sophomore year. I tried out for varsity baseball. I was good. I was a pitcher. I was a pretty good baseball player back in the day. And, at the end, we had pitchers and catchers practice, and we were giving out uniforms at the end of practice. And being the sophomore, I was the last one online. All the seniors and juniors went first. I remember the coach saying, all right, pitchers, after you get your uniform, go out there, run 2 miles. Catchers, go out there, run 1 mile, which is sort of like a par for the course with this guy. Now, the difference was our militaristic coach, who coached by himself, after he handed out the last uniform, which was mine, he then drove away. So here I am on the track, and I have to run 8 laps to get to 2 miles. I had never done 2 miles before. I was very intimidated. I didn't know what I was going to do. And as I'm running, some of the other kids are dropping off. Now, I don't know if they saw the coach leave and they just decided, all right, 5 laps is good enough. 6 laps is good enough. He's not watching. All I knew is this. I was the sophomore. The coach was militaristic in the way he did his discipline. And in the back of my head, I'm thinking, that guy handed out that last uniform, drove away, but he's counting my laps. And he's like looking beyond, I don't know, like up on a hill or behind the bleachers. Somewhere he's watching me to see if I have the guts to finish it on my own. And you know what? And if I don't do all 8 laps, he's going to jump out of the woods and cut me from the team. And you know what? If you knew the guy, this is not out of the question, mind you. It's not. So the fear, was such that I was like, I got to 4 laps and now I'm over 4 laps. And this is uncharted territory for me. Right now I got to do a whole nother mile, 5 laps, 6 laps, and somewhere around 6 and 7 laps. I was like, I started to feel really good about myself. I started to feel like, you know what, I can do this. And it became less about, oh my God, I'm going to get in trouble and this guy's watching somewhere, and more about, oh my God, I'm going to run 2 miles for the first time in my life. And that was enough to get me through. And, I got to tell you, somewhere around 5 or 6 miles, or 5 or 6 laps, I was the only one on that track. Everyone was gone. So I assure you that some of those guys did not run their 8 laps. I assure you that they left and they just decided to risk it, that the coach wasn't watching. Or at least he had been inside for most of them when most of them started. So how could he possibly know how many laps they had done? So they just left and I just stayed there to the very end, finished my 2 miles and went home. And again, I felt really good. I felt really accomplished that day. Now, you can fast forward from there. I don't think I ever ran another 2 miles until college. Now, one of the things I remember, and I go back to that whole thing about not having the internet and not knowing. We just had no no way of knowing these things unless you went to the library and bought a book on how to run or on nutrition or things like that. And even then, you had no idea. We would go. So some of the football guys, my friend John, my friend Harry, Charlie, Wyatt, we would all go down to the football field, and we, at times, over the summer, and we would say, all right, we're going to put this extra work in. We're going to be in shape. We're going to come into this season, and we're going to be doing things that no other guys out there, no other towns are doing this. Nobody's out there pushing themselves as hard as we are over the summer. We'd go down to that track, and we'd run. We'd run 4 laps. And I think about it, all right, yeah, we'd run a mile. We'd run a mile and think we did something so great. And I don't remember we never timed ourselves. I'm guessing 8 or 9 minutes was probably, we weren't totally out of shape, but we didn't understand. Really, once we finished a mile, we felt great. We were like, yes, we did a mile. Yes, we're going to be so good. And then we'd go down to the pizza store 2 blocks down, Two Brothers Pizza. We'd go down, we'd get 2 slices and a Pepsi and throw 1,000 calories worth of pizza down our throat after we had just burned about, 200-300? Never in our wildest dreams did we ever think that running a mile and eating 2 slices of pizza, that they would not offset. Like, those things do not offset. And now that we know that stuff, it's like, thinking back, it's like, man, I thought I was working hard. I thought I was putting the effort in, but I wasn't. And it's now, it's sad because you think you were doing so well. And I guess, yeah, running any distance is better than running none. But, thinking that you're doing so well and it's like, and then you'd come back to practice in the fall and you'd run a few sprints and be like, man, I'm tired. How come I'm so tired? I worked so hard in the summer. And it's like, no, actually you didn't. You didn't work too hard. You ran a mile here and there. And that's it. So, it's just sort of the world that we lived in. Now, I went to college to play baseball. And there is a really long story about my experience playing baseball at Siena College. And I would love to tell it someday. It's not for this podcast. It's for the book. It's definitely for the book. But college sports, my experience was awful. It was really bad. I was a real good pitcher my senior year in high school. I decided to go to Siena to play baseball. And I feel like I was duped to go there. I feel like the coach, I was naive. I was totally naive, which means that partially it was my own fault, but I did not belong on that campus to play baseball there. Now, I was a walk-on amongst the incoming class of freshman scholarship players that I didn't know existed. And I actually did make the team, which was, looking back, that was actually an accomplishment in and of itself. So here I am on a, Division I college baseball team. And after the fall season, we get a running program. Now, I had really high hopes and goals in terms of baseball, and I wanted to put forth a really big effort in the off season. So I remember taking this program and just sticking to it every single day. Every day I ran, I did whatever they told me to do, and basically it was a step up program, like any kind of marathon training. So 1 week you would do a long run on the weekend, and you would do running intervals, sort of shorter intervals during the week. And every weekend, your long run would build up, maybe a half mile more than last week, until we got to 5 miles. So, and there you have it. Up until that point, I had only run up to 2 miles. It was still, my high was from that day of my sophomore year. Never did he ask, by the way, the same coach for my junior and senior year, never did he ask us pitchers to run 2 miles again after that. For some reason, that day was a 2 mile day, and never again. So that was still my high. It was my longest distance ran. So here I am, and now I'm following the letter of this law, of this running program for baseball. And, so here, start with 2 miles or something. I ran 2 miles, then I got to 2.5, 3, and every weekend I am expanding the longest distance. And it's so, guys, you guys know, if you've done this before, it's so gratifying to run further than you ever have before, and to reach that uncharted territory where you've never gotten there before. Just something about being in that place that it's like, man, and now it's funny, as you go on, and as you do marathons, it's like, man, to get that feeling again, I gotta run far. I gotta run more than 26.2 miles now in order to get that feeling again. There are ultras out there, but, it's a wonderful feeling being able to expand that every single week. And you feel like I said, it's that empowerment thing going on. So I remember, I got up to 5 miles. And I did 5 miles that winter, and I felt great. And, looking back, that was probably the best shape I had ever been in up to that point. I finished the baseball season that year, and it was an awful experience. And I went in that freshman year loving the sport of baseball. It was my passion. And I left that spring after the baseball season, and I despised the sport of baseball with everything I had. And I'd never played again. And it's kind of a sad story, but I joined the football team sophomore to senior years at Siena, which no longer has a football team. But I never had to do that distance anymore. It became more about lifting and short sprints and stuff like that. So I left college, and 5 miles was the longest I had ever run. And I had never had any desire to run more. And I know at a certain point now, my weight fluctuated from then on. Over the next 20 years, it would go up, it would go down, it would go up, go down. I think maybe in 2001, I actually, I will say, yeah, in 2001, early 2001, I was in a good mode. I had been training. I'd moved to New York City. I was 190 pounds, which was my low after college. That's the lowest I ever was. So I moved to New York City, 190 pounds, and I ran with a friend of mine, my friend Pete, who had already run the New York City Marathon himself. And he was training his friend Paul, who was out doing a 6 mile run. And they asked me to come along, and I said, yeah, I don't think I'm going to be able to do 6 miles. I hadn't done 5 miles in so long. I was in good shape, but I didn't think I could do 6. And they're like, oh, come on. And so I begrudgingly went, and we did a big loop around the park. And I didn't know where I was going. I knew I had to keep up because I didn't want to get lost. It was dark. I just moved to the city, so it wasn't like I was nervous about it. Actually, I don't even think I lived there until months later, but I think I just was visiting my friend Pete. But anyway, that's just a different part of the story. I just want to give you guys the truth, so no one's like, oh, you didn't move till whatever. But, I had always sort of been enthralled with the idea of being able to run the New York City Marathon. I just always was like, yeah, that would be something really cool to do. So I ran this 6 miles around Central Park, and I kept up with these guys, and I'm sure I held them back a certain degree. And I remember just running and being in pain and being like, just keep moving. Put one foot in front of the other. I was sort of counting the blocks and trying to figure out where I was in the park and figuring out how much I had left. And I did it. And I ran the 6 miles. And I remember leaving the park that day thinking, man, if I could do 6, I could just keep going. And I could train myself. I can do a marathon. What would stop me? And I can do New York because I've always wanted to do New York. What could stop me? I can train. I can train in the city. I can do all this stuff. And it felt really good. So, I went and I registered for the New York City Marathon lottery that year. And I didn't even know there was a lottery. I figured anyone crazy enough to run 26.2, you probably pay the fee and you line up. But who knew? So many people wanted to actually torture themselves and pay $250 to do it. But I entered the lottery and I did not get in. And to be honest, I don't even know what the chances. The odds now are like 17% or something. Like 17% odds to get in the lottery. So who knows what it was back then? Maybe it's like 25%. Anyway, I didn't get in. And I let myself go and I didn't train. That was it. I just figured that was my one shot. And I sort of fell into city life between then and the marathon. And of course, that was 2001, September 11th. It happened. And I was living in Manhattan at the time. It was an incredibly memorable day. But in terms of running, I don't really want to get into that because I could talk about that, but I don't want to dishonor it in any way either. But, in terms of the story, somewhere in mid to late September, I got an email from New York Roadrunners. I know you didn't get in the lottery, but we had a lot of people cancel because of travel issues. Because people didn't want to travel so far, international flights and stuff, with everything that had just happened. Would you like to run the New York City Marathon? Of course, I hadn't run a mile in months. I had gained probably 20 pounds, which, those who know me or close to me, I gain weight in a heartbeat. If I'm not training, I'm gaining. It's like a mindset I have. If I'm in the mindset where I'm working out all the time, that means I'm dieting right. If I'm not working out all the time, I'm probably not dieting right and I'm gaining weight. It's just the way it is. It's what I've accepted, even though it's unacceptable, if that makes sense. But, so I had to decline. And I didn't run it that year. I did go and watch it, and it was incredibly motivating and inspiring. And it's always like, I lived in the city for years, and on that day, they always put the gates up, and I remember walking down to First Avenue and seeing people run, and not always fast runners, right? They're normal, regular people, and looking out there and saying that I always wanted to be on the other side of that fence and not be on the spectator side. I didn't run for years after that, and I gained a lot of weight, and I moved from New York to Boston to Springfield, and I got up to 280 pounds, and we're going to cut the break right now, and we're going to talk about how I picked it up from there. Hey guys, my friend Lauren is creating an incredible resource for runners and triathletes. It's called raceadvisors.com. She has amassed a list of thousands of races, 5Ks, 10Ks, half marathons, marathons, ultramarathons, and triathlons, and anything in between. If you're thinking about running a race, look it up and check out the reviews. Have a favorite race of your own? Look it up. See what others have to say about it. Or better yet, leave a review of your own. raceadvisors.com. Read it, race it, review it. All right, we're going to go into part 3 now of this series. I don't know if this is going to be a good podcast. This might suck. Maybe I'm droning on. Maybe I'm just talking shit. I don't know. I'm just kind of making this up as I go along, folks. But yeah, obviously, it was 2014. Really, it was kind of like the end of 2013. And we're going to pick it up there. And actually, where we're going to pick it up? I'll tell you where we're going to pick it up. Because we had Laura on the podcast the other day, a couple weeks ago. And she was right up close to where the Boston bombing was. And I think I might have told the story on her podcast too. But on the day of the Boston bombing, I was at work. And I remember watching it. And I remember seeing the picture, especially the guy with the cowboy hat, who I just met recently too, at the Marine Corps 5K, the honor run in Boston. I'm just thinking about how crazy it is that all this stuff happened. But I remember seeing that picture of him pinching this guy's artery from the guy's leg is missing, and he's pinching the artery, and he saved his life. And I remember thinking to myself, my God, I can't believe this happened. And I would do anything to be able to run Boston next year, which would have been 2014. And I started running, and every time I ran, it just, in my head, it's what I remembered. It would spur me on to run further and further. Now, for whatever reason, it never caught on with me. I was like 275 pounds. It was really hard. I couldn't even run a quarter mile. And here I was thinking that I was going to run Boston Marathon in the following year. And it started out pretty good. The first couple of weeks, I was probably, I was doing well and getting out there often. And as it tends to happen, I started falling back into bad patterns. And eventually, after a few months, it wasn't happening. And I let it go. and I stopped running again. And my weight started to climb. And like I said, it peaked right around Thanksgiving of 2013 at about 280 pounds. And I knew I was out of shape, and there was just something that was wrong with my psyche. It was just, whether it was work or family, or I would leave work and I just wanted to get home to my daughter and spend time with my family. It just always overtook my desire to run. So I would get up in the morning, go to work, come home, think about working out, and then not, and then go home, eat. There's usually a bottle of wine that was open by the time I got home. So once I took a sip of that wine, there was no way I was working out. We'd eat dinner, hang out with my family, go to bed. Just, there was no space. As far as I was concerned, there was no space for running, no space for exercise. And looking back, of course, there was time and there was a way to do it. It just, hey, don't drink the wine, or hey, go to the gym at lunch for an hour. I could have done it. I just never decided to do it. I just didn't want to. I didn't have the desire. Hey, wake up in the morning. Set that alarm for 45 minutes earlier and get up and get on the damn elliptical. At that time, I just had a stationary bike. It was all there and it was all doable. I just didn't do it. Nor did I recognize that I could do it. I just didn't want to. I didn't challenge myself enough. I didn't want it that badly. Now, something happened in late 2013, and I kind of don't want to get into this because it's the details of which, because, my daughter's 9, she's going to listen to this stuff. But it was sort of based on my divorce. And, the quick and dirty was my wife and I didn't really agree with things. We were on different ends of the spectrum when it came to marriage. Number one was I wanted to be married, and number two was she did not. So, and really that's about as deep as we're going to get into it. But it was devastating to me. And there was a lot of really bad, it put me in this strange mental place. And for those first few weeks, I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. Time just seemed to go by really, really fast. I just wanted things to be fixed, and it was sort of a nightmare. You're living a nightmare. And when, that first week, I remember 7 days, I slept a total of 8 hours, which was really bad. And I couldn't eat. I couldn't do any. It was really just depressing. And I started exercising really as a way to take my mind off of things. And just put myself, and it helped. Exercise is a big stress reliever. And it worked for me. It passed the time. It got me through, it got me thinking. It was a nice safe space where I could have constructive thoughts of what to do and how to go about things, and maintain my own personal dignity, and really try to rebuild my pride, a lot of which had been lost through that process. And that first time I went out, I remember getting on that treadmill, putting that towel over the numbers and trying to run as far as I could. And when I took that towel off and it read something like 0.26 miles or 0.28 miles, something like that. On the one hand, I was so depressed that it was so low. But on the other hand, I knew that I was going to be able to improve and that it would improve quickly. And I just went at it, guys. I did. I set my alarm early. I was already waking up at 5:15 to go to work, and I would set it for 4:30, and I would get up, and most of the time I wasn't even sleeping. But for some reason, the mindset that I was in, I was able to get up with no problem and go right to that bike and ride that bike for 45 minutes to an hour before work. Then I'd go to work and I'd do a little exercise there at lunch. Then I'd come home and I'd do another hour on that bike, and I did this for a month straight. And it just is what I needed to do for myself. I remember really getting into music during the time. Also, I hadn't really been playing music a lot, and I downloaded a whole bunch of songs to my iPhone, and I was able to kind of use that, and it was all part of the escape. But after a month, I looked down. I was down like 25 pounds. And again, this is not a diet that any nutritionist would prescribe, right? Starvation, malnutrition, and a newborn, earnest effort into exercise 3 hours a day or 2 hours a day, is not anything that a nutritionist or a physical therapist or whatever trainer would prescribe. But that's what I did, and that's how it worked. And then I remember the new year rolled around and I jumped back on a treadmill in January. And it had been the first time since I got on there since I had done the treadmill a month before. I hadn't run because I didn't see any, productive means in it. What am I going to do? Get on there and run 0.3 miles and feel great? No, I was going to feel shitty. And all of a sudden now I'm down some weight. And I'm like, let me go check out that treadmill. Maybe I can kick out a mile. I remember I put like 5 songs onto or maybe it was 4 onto a set list. Because I figured each song is 4 minutes long, 12 minutes. I can run a mile in there, and put one on for, extra measure. So 4 songs is what I did. And I started running 5.2 miles an hour and I felt good. And I just kept going at it. I passed 0.28 miles. I knew I could do that. That was fine. And all of a sudden, I'm on a half mile. Why? I'm still feeling good here. I'm on 3/4 of a mile. Wait a minute. I can do more than a mile. It was wonderful. It was like, man, what's happening here? I got to a mile. I felt great. And I just kept pushing on and pushing on. And I got to a mile and a half and things started to hurt a little bit. And I said, you know what? I'm going to take this win for the day. I'm going to take my chips off the table. And I did. And I left at a mile and a half and I felt so great. And that was early January. Now, fast forward another few weeks and there's a running winter series in the local park near us, Forest Park, that takes place every weekend on the winter. They do alternate weekends, 5K, 10K, 5K, 10K. And so I found it and I was like, maybe I'll try my hand at a 5K. I started running a little bit more, especially on the weekends. I knew I was building up. I knew I could do at least 2 miles. And I'm like, let's go down there and try a 5K. And so I did. And I remember I was supposed to go with my neighbor, Alex. And Alex was sick that morning, but his nephew was there. I'm striking a blank on his name. Dimitri. So Dimitri, he's a young guy, probably like 17. Basketball player. I'm like, why don't you come run the 5K with me? He's like, yeah, I'll come. So he comes to run the 5K with me. And this guy plays basketball. He's in shape. Now the gun goes off. There's 113 runners. We take off. I'm dying. First, you go right up this big hill. It's not long, but it's very steep. You go up this hill and all of a sudden I'm breathing heavy and I got the music in my ears and I'm not paying attention to my breathing and Dimitri's running with me. He's like, he could go way ahead and he's like staying with me. And he's like, dude, just breathe, slow your breathing, like calm down. I'm like, all right. So we get to about 2 miles. We pass a basketball court. Dimitri recognizes the people. He goes to shoot some hoops. I'm struggling through my race. I go on, I run ahead and then 3 minutes later, he catches up to me. And eventually he did beat me. Now, at the very end of the race, I got passed by a 9-year-old. It might have been an 8-year-old. And I came in third to last that day. I came in third to last, and the 2 people that finished behind me walked the entire race. Now, you have to understand, like anyone who's running a 5K during the winter, in the middle of February, or in the beginning of February in the Northeast, these guys are seasoned runners. This isn't, it's not like just entertaining, people just going out for a nice casual 5K. These are guys that are training and working out and they're in shape. So I didn't really feel too bad. As a matter of fact, I felt very accomplished that I finished. I ran the whole way. And that was my first race, and I never run a race before. So yeah, I'd run that distance before, but I'd never run the race before. And, man, it got me in a really good frame of mind. And, the difference was, being on a treadmill and running at 0 incline versus going out there and running these hills was a kick in the butt. That was a little different. But again, it added to the achievement. It added to the feeling of achievement. And I got to that 5K. Now, there was a 10K in March. It's called the St. Patrick's Day Road Race in Holyoke. And it's a big race around here. And my wife had done it the year before. And I was just like, why, she was doing it again. And I'm like, why don't I do it too? I remember her saying to me, and this is how the relationship wasn't that great. I shouldn't even say it, but she's like, you shouldn't do a 10K. You're pushing yourself too hard. You can't do this. This is what I talk about when you guys hear me sometimes talk about like negative motivation. Because there's so many people out there that are ready to pat you on the back, but sometimes it's when that person tells you that you can't do something that it makes you want to do it all the more. And so when she told me that, it just, it's like the Rocky music started playing and I started going at it, and training even harder and harder and harder. And then finally I got to that one day in the gym where I was like, you know what? I'm doing a 10K. So I kicked out 6.2 miles on the treadmill. I took a picture of it and I sent it to her and I said, how come I'm not doing Holyoke? So finally she's like, all right, fine. Come to Holyoke. And I did. And that day, even though I'd run 6.2 on the treadmill, I finished Holyoke in, I think it was probably like 105. I don't know. It was actually a faster pace than I had done the 5K a month and a half before. So it just made me feel even more accomplished. It's, again, so empowering. And for someone who's sort of like getting their life back and trying to figure things out at that moment, it was such a good, like when I talk about pride, like it was such a good, it was a moment that I could be proud about what I did and what I was doing. I was still losing weight. I would track my weight daily, and then I would average it out at the end of the week. And for something like 40 weeks, no, it wasn't that long. Maybe it was like 30 weeks or 25 weeks in a row, I lost weight. And at this point, I was probably down to about, from 280, probably down to about 230, 235 pounds, something like that. It was mid-March. And I remember going to work and people were starting to notice. And they would say, wow, you're losing weight. What are you doing? Oh, I'm running. And again, empowering, right? And when people see that good changes are happening, and really, I think it even started to extend to like my attitude at times where I was like finding myself and I'm more confident in myself. My clothes fit better and things feel better. Even though I still had this horrible thing going on in the background, people were taking notice that I was losing weight and things looked good with me. So, the comments were great and they were just all the more motivating. So, one woman in particular came up to me and she said, hey, I hear that you're running. And I'm like, yeah. She goes, I do this half marathon. It's in this town called Cheshire. It's always in the spring. I always do it. I hurt my knee this year, so I'm not doing it, but you should look into it. And I was like, oh, half marathon. Yeah, me do a half marathon. The most I'd run at that point was 6.2 miles, right? But I still thought about it and I was like, that would be good. And I had actually thought about it. And at that moment, I said to myself, a half marathon is something I'd want to do. And I had signed up for, the Hartford half marathon, which takes place the same day as the Hartford full marathon in October. I just thought that was a more a realistic goal for me to go from 6 to 13.1 miles over 4 months or 6 months actually, than, to just jump into running a half. But when she told me the race was flat and she told me it was always the race that she does every year, I said, you know what? When is this race? Maybe I'll try it. So she had me look it up and it was a Thursday afternoon, and the race was Sunday, 4 days away. I had never run more than 6.2 miles, and what did I do? I signed up. I registered. I don't know why. It probably wasn't smart. Looking back, I'm like, maybe I wasn't smart. But you know what? You're never going to know unless you try, right? And at that point, I was sort of like a gunslinger. I was sort of like taking chances. I didn't really care. I just wanted to see what I could accomplish. And I figured, if I go out there and I fail, I know I'm going to get 8 miles. I know I'll probably get 9, 10, maybe. Who knows? I've never run 10 miles before. Wouldn't that be a great goal? If I ran 10 miles and they carried me to less 3 in an ambulance, it'd still be pretty cool. It'd be a good story. So I remember I drove there that morning, in the car, 5:30 in the morning by myself. And for some reason, I wasn't nervous. I think I might have done 7 miles on the treadmill Thursday night just to see if I could do it. And I did, and I felt good. And I went out there and I ran those first 10 miles and I was like, yeah, I feel pretty good. Somewhere around mile 10 though, it started to change. Things started going south for me in this race. But again, remember I talked about being in uncharted territory? Here I was, and I was in it for a long time, right? So maybe I'd done 7 miles on the treadmill, but here at mile 8, it's uncharted territory. I've never been here before, but I'm doing it. Mile 9. Wow, this is incredible. Mile 10. And for those 3 miles, I was feeling really good. And all of a sudden it started to change and the pain started coming. It was something I never felt before. And I remember looking around in the beginning of the race and seeing people with goo gels and people with nutrition and carrying water bottles. I didn't even drink any water that day. I never had any training running this distance. I always just felt like when I was in college or even when I used to play football, if I used to drink during the breaks, like drink water, I don't know if it's just because I drank too much water, but it always made me somewhat nauseous. And I always felt like I drank too much water. It gave me cramps, things like that. So I stayed away from the water, which looking back was pretty dumb. I stayed away from the water, went a half marathon without a sip of water. At mile 10 or 11, I was like, wow, those dorks with the goo gels, maybe they were onto something. Cause that's what I was thinking, like, why these guys got gels? It's 13 miles. It's not like it's a marathon. It's not like they're running 50-mile ultras. It's 13 miles. It's like just a little double. It's double what I did a month ago, Anyway, I wound up finishing. I walked the last half mile of that race, and I actually felt bad about walking that last half mile. I remember when I stopped running, I said to myself, all right, I'll get some relief, except I didn't get any relief. The pain just didn't go away. After I finished the race, I sat down. I couldn't even get to the water table, which was like 10 feet away. I sat on the ground and leaned against the fence. I probably stayed there for a good 15, 20 minutes before I even tried to get up. And then when I tried to get up, there's all this free food and all this free stuff, and I couldn't go anywhere near it because it was all the way in the back, and I couldn't walk that far. I got to my car, which was, I'm shocked that I made it without having to stop and sit. And I had a really good parking spot too. God forbid I didn't have a good parking spot that day, but I had a really great spot, and I found my car. I got in it, and I sat there for another 15 minutes, just waiting for the feelings to come back in my legs. Leaving that day, there was a lot of traffic, and every time I had to stop, I would put the car in park because I didn't have enough faith in the strength of my foot to keep enough pressure on the brake pedal to not slam into the car in front of me. Yet the kicker was, I still got a medal. And I still had that thing around my neck, and when I walked through the door, when I got home, and my daughter saw me, and she said, "Dad, you won the race." She looked at that medal and she, "Dad, you won the race." And, maybe I didn't come in first, but man, it sure did feel like I was a winner that day. It really did. And it was so uplifting. And I immediately signed up for another half marathon, like a month away. I was like, screw it. This was a challenge that I needed to overcome because I had known that I had walked that last half mile, and it really bothered me. And it might even only been a quarter mile. I don't even remember, but somewhere between a quarter and a half. And it really bothered me that I walked that portion, and I wanted to conquer this race on my own terms. So I signed up for another one right away, and I trained harder and harder. And, eventually I did. I finished that next half marathon. I remember 2 days before, I got a call from my friend Anthony. He works at American Cancer Society. He says, "Hey man, I see that you're doing all this running." I'm like, "Yeah, I did a half marathon. I'm doing another one in a couple days." He's like, "Yeah, well, American Cancer Society has a running team, and we sponsor the New York City Marathon. Do you have any interest in running?" And I said, "No." Now remember, I had planned on doing a half marathon in October, and I still hadn't conquered the half marathon. So I'm thinking there's no way I can run a full marathon by November, the first week of November, New York City. I would love to do it. And not only that, but if I had any marathon in my entire brain that I wanted to do, it was New York, right? I had signed up for it years ago and didn't get in. I grew up in New York. I lived in New York. I watched this race. I always said that I wanted to be on the other side of the railing. That was the race that I wanted to do. I just didn't know if I could do it. Now I sat on it for a couple days. I'm not going to tell this part of the story, but anyway, I talked to some people about doing it, and some people said, "Yeah, you should do it." And by the way, I love those kinds of people. "Yeah, you should do it." But there were some people that said, "No, you're crazy. You're absolutely insane. You can't do it." One person in particular laughed. I'll never forget that laugh. That laugh, had me on the treadmill. I thought about that laugh on the treadmill, and it pushed me through extra miles over and over and over again. And I signed up for this race. I signed up for New York City. I raised something like $6,000-7,000 for American Cancer Society. And I went at it, and I trained harder, and I did. I crushed that second half marathon that I did. I ran it all the way on my own terms. I set a PR, and then I got the marathon training book from American Cancer Society, and I went at that. And man, it was crossing that finish line that day. And obviously, it's a long story if I wanted to tell it, but I'm not. Crossing that finish line is still the greatest moment in terms of racing, my racing career. Crossing the finish line at New York City Marathon for the first time. I ran the whole way other than the water stops, which was something I really wanted to do, especially after that half marathon experience. I wanted to be able to run it the whole way, and I did. Which I know, look, we don't have to get into this argument of running a marathon versus, look, I know you guys, some of you guys walk, and that's cool. Everyone sets their own goals. They do it their own way. Hell, I have a picture of probably a 60-year-old Japanese woman walking and eating as I'm running, and you see her number, and she beat me. So yes, you can run faster. Some people enjoy the run walk method, and they'll post faster results than I will. And even if I run the whole way, and that's cool. That's totally cool. But for me, having grown up the way I did, think back to that 2-mile run I told you about when I thought the coach was watching. Well, what do you think that militaristic coach would have done if he drove by and he saw me walking? I would have had to run another full mile. It would have been disaster. So, that's sort of like the mental makeup that I have, and it's just sort of the way I was raised and the way I look at running that way. I don't, it's no disrespect to anyone who walks. It's just, and I would hope that people respect the way that I see it and the way I look at it. And it's just, that's the way I treat it for myself. So I was very proud to be able to run it the full way. And man, and I thought from that moment on that, I would do marathons every year. This was so good for me. I will do marathons every year. I'll go from city to city, do different ones all the time. It'll be a great way to travel. And for the next 2 years, I did maybe another 3 marathons. I did Fort Lauderdale twice. I did Marine Corps Marathon. And I never did as well as I did in New York City that first time. And that was another thing that just it bothered me. It bothered me that I couldn't maintain my focus. Now, things had cleared up in my personal life. I no longer had that very big, that issue, that problem, that stress. I found a new relationship. My wife now, Stephanie, and I, we have a wonderful family life now. It's amazing. It's great. And there's no stress there. The stress is, who's going to do the food shopping? That's the stress. Or the stress is, oh my God, did I leave my shoes out? And she's going to get mad at me. But, that's the stress, which is nothing compared to what I went through before. So I lost that stress. I lost that, I lost that negative motivation too. It's not there. But anyway, it's still, for some reason, marathon training is an investment. You don't just marathon train as a casual hobby. You either do it or you don't. And I wasn't doing it. I was trying it as a casual hobby, and it wasn't working for me, and my times were getting slower and slower. So that's how I kind of got into this whole Ironman idea. And again, I don't do things in small doses all the time. I jump in with 2 feet. I had no desire to do a small triathlon. I wanted to be an Ironman. That's what I wanted to do. So, and I did the same thing I did for the New York City Marathon, which was as soon as I had the idea and as soon as I had clearance from Stephanie, I registered for Lake Placid. And I got into it. And you guys know the story because we've been through that. And I'm not going to tell the rest of it. We're kind of wrapping it up here anyway. So yeah, I trained hard last year. And I finished Lake Placid. And then we did Maryland, with the 2 guys that I had on the podcast, Jim and Joe, a couple weeks ago. We did Maryland. And I do have to say that after I finished those Ironman, my training has been down. It hasn't been very good the last, probably 6 months. It's been pretty weak, and I really do have to turn it on here because I'm doing Lake Placid again, and it's just sort of like that same pattern that I fall into, which is accomplish something and then sit back and think you're just going to accomplish it again. It's like, yeah, I don't have that fear anymore. I know I could do it, but I don't fit in my wetsuit anymore as of today. Now, I have less than 60 days to get my butt in gear. And look, it's not like I haven't been training. I actually ran a half marathon on the treadmill yesterday. Last night with the Celtics-Cavs game 7. Celtics lost. Terrible game. But I spent the whole entire game on the treadmill. Tonight's game is Warriors-Rockets. I'm going to spend that game and then some on the bike trainer because I haven't done my bike yet today. So I am training. That's my next goal. I hope that I'm in shape. I hope I might actually just go buy another bigger wetsuit just to have something that fits and not have to stress it. But I'm gonna have to get after it these next few weeks. And really, that's the story. That's kind of like, I'm gonna wrap it up there. But that's the story of how I kind of got into this sport and how I've developed over the last few years. Where I'm at now, I'm not in Ironman shape today. I'm gonna be in probably 45 days. And yeah, I could do it. I know I can. But I wanted to give this to you guys as this is sort of my, I don't know. I feel like I needed to do a solo podcast. I needed to kind of explain all this stuff. You know what? I don't know if you guys are going to like this. You may listen to it. You may not. You may listen to half. You may listen to none. You may not listen to it at all. Maybe it sucks. I don't know. But, I love doing this podcast. I love talking to you guys. I love the group we've set up together over on Facebook, and I wish you all good luck. And even the people that don't get involved on Facebook, I know there's a lot of people out there listening to this thing that don't really reach out, and that's cool, man. I love hearing that I have people that listen that even if you don't reach out, it's super cool. I love having this podcast and developing it with you guys. So on that note, we're going to wrap things up right there. And as always, just remember, when it comes to running, I am no expert. I'm just ordinary.